Something significant just happened at the Strait of Hormuz, and it changes the entire military equation in this conflict. The United States Central Command has confirmed that American forces successfully deployed multiple 5,000-pound, deep-penetrating bunker-buster munitions against hardened Iranian missile sites positioned along the coastline of the Strait of Hormuz. The stated objective was straightforward. Iran had been using these installations to threaten commercial shipping, attempting to transit one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet. The United States has now moved to eliminate that threat at its source. If you want to stay ahead of developments like this as they happen, subscribe to Frum Analysis right now and activate the notification bell. This story has layers that most coverage is missing entirely, and we are going to walk through all of them. Let us start by understanding what Iran had built along the Strait of Hormuz and why dismantling it required this specific type of weapon. Iran's strategy for controlling the strait was not built around a single system. It was built around layers of overlapping capabilities designed to make any transit of the waterway dangerous for commercial vessels. Fast attack boats equipped with surface missiles could swarm targets at close range and retreat quickly. Drone swarms provided a low-cost harassment capability that was difficult to counter comprehensively. Mining operations created persistent threats that required extensive clearance operations before safe navigation could resume. But the most serious long-term threat, the one that American planners identified as requiring the most urgent attention, was the network of anti-ship cruise missile batteries positioned along the Iranian coastline. Systems like the Qadiyeh and the Carter are mounted on mobile truck launchers, which makes them harder to track and target than fixed installations. They have ranges covering virtually every point in the strait, from the narrow 12-meter sections to the wider approaches extending nearly 200 miles. Iran even fields the Abab cruise missile with a range exceeding 600 miles, extending the threat envelope far beyond the strait itself into the broader Gulf region. When you add ballistic cruise missiles like the Hormuz 2 and the College Fars, both with ranges around 185 miles and designed specifically to strike ships using satellite navigation guidance, you have a comprehensive anti-access architecture that was making commercial transit genuinely dangerous. Since Operation Epic Fury began, at least 20 vessels had been attacked in and around the strait. Insurance rates for ships attempting the transit had become prohibitive. The majority of the 27% of global seaborne energy that normally flows through this choke point had effectively stopped moving. Oil prices had breached $100 per barrel multiple times during the conflict. The strait was functionally closed, and the United States needed a way to reopen it. Here is where the weapon system itself becomes critically important to understand, because the choice to deploy the GBU-72 tells us something significant about both the nature of the Iranian installations and the American assessment of what was required to destroy them. The core problem with conventional munitions against Iranian missile sites is straightforward. Iran spent years, arguably decades, preparing for exactly the kind of air campaign that Operation Epic Fury represents. The missile launchers along the Hormuz coastline are not sitting in open fields waiting to be struck by standard bombs. They are housed in hardened underground tunnels cut into mountain sides. They emerge from these tunnels, fire, and return underground before counter-battery systems can respond effectively. The tunnel entrances themselves are reinforced to survive conventional strikes. Standard 2,000-pound bombs can damage surface structures. They can collapse lighter fortifications, but they cannot reliably defeat deeply buried, heavily reinforced tunnel systems of the kind Iran constructed over years of preparation. The United States recognized this limitation and began developing a new generation of penetrating munitions specifically designed to address it. The GBU-72 represents the current leading edge of that development program. It is a 5,000-pound weapon designed to replace the aging GBU-28, which entered service in 1991 and was itself a bunker buster built around similar operational requirements. But 3 decades of advances in warhead design, explosive chemistry, and guidance systems mean the GBU-72 is a fundamentally more capable system than its predecessor. What makes the GBU-72 especially relevant to the Hormuz situation is its approach to defeating hardened tunnel systems. The objective is not necessarily to destroy everything inside the bunker, though that is certainly preferable when achievable. The objective is to collapse the tunnel access points, sealing whatever equipment is inside and rendering it operationally useless without directly destroying it. A missile launcher trapped permanently underground is as militarily irrelevant as one that has been blown up. And collapsing tunnel entrances requires a weapon that can penetrate significant depths of reinforced concrete and compacted earth before detonating. The GBU-28 could penetrate approximately 15 feet of reinforced concrete and around 150 feet of earth before detonating. The GBU-72, as a direct replacement designed for more demanding targets, almost certainly exceeds those figures, though precise specifications remain classified. What is known is that the warhead combines AFX-757 and PBXN-109 explosive compounds, the same combination used in the massive ordnance penetrator, the 30,000-pound weapon previously used against Iranian nuclear facilities. The fact that American weapons designers chose this specific explosive combination for the GBU-72 suggests they have high confidence in its performance against the hardest targets in the Iranian inventory. Stay with Frum Report as we continue breaking this down, because the delivery method matters just as much as the weapon itself. Now let us talk about how these weapons were actually delivered to their targets, because the logistics of the operation reveal important details about American planning and Iranian defensive capabilities. The GBU-72 was first publicly revealed in 2021 when the US Air Force announced the successful test drop from an F-15E Strike Eagle. That test established the weapon's basic compatibility with one of America's primary tactical strike platforms. However, the F-15E can carry only a single GBU-72, which creates obvious limitations when the mission requires multiple simultaneous strikes against numerous tunnel entrances across a distributed network of sites. The B-1B Lancer bomber provides a more efficient delivery solution for mass bunker-busting operations. Each B-1B can carry up to 12 GBU-72 munitions on external pylons, meaning a single aircraft can deliver what would require 12 F-15 sorties to match. When estimates suggest that up to 48 GBU-72 munitions were deployed against Iranian missile sites during this operation, the mathematics strongly favor the B-1B as the primary delivery platform. American B-1Bs are currently positioned at RAF Fairford in the United Kingdom, placing them within operational range of Iranian targets with appropriate tanker support. The most probable operational picture involves B-1Bs conducting the primary strike package, potentially supported by F-15ES, handling supplementary targets, or providing additional coverage after initial tunnel systems had been collapsed. The GBU-72's guidance system, which combines GPS navigation with inertial reference for terminal accuracy, allows the weapon to be released from standoff distances that significantly reduce the launching aircraft's exposure to whatever residual Iranian air defense capability remains operational. That residual capability is substantially degraded from its pre-conflict level. Analysis from the Alma Research and Education Center indicates that Operation Epic Fury and the preceding Israeli operations collectively destroyed approximately 85% of Iran's integrated air defense network. What remains is largely isolated point defense systems without the connectivity to function as a coordinated defensive architecture. This means American strike aircraft can approach Iranian targets with significantly reduced risk compared to what they would have faced before the conflict began. There is an important historical precedent worth examining here because it suggests Iran may have had prior exposure to this weapon system and still could not prevent its use. A CBS News report from May 2024 cited 3 American officials confirming that the GBU-72 was used against Houthi missile sites in Yemen following attacks on Red Sea commercial shipping. The operational parallel is striking. The Houthis, like Iran and Hormuz, were attempting to shut down a critical maritime waterway using missile batteries and drone attacks against commercial vessels. The United States responded in both cases by going after the missile infrastructure itself rather than simply defending against individual launches. The Houthis are directly supported by Iran and are widely described as an Iranian proxy force. This means Iranian military planners almost certainly had access to detailed assessments of GBU-72 performance against their proxies' fortifications in Yemen. They knew this weapon existed. They knew what it could do. They spent the intervening period, presumably attempting to harden their own sites further or develop countermeasures. And still, when the GBU-72 was deployed against their Hormuz installations, they could not prevent the strikes or meaningfully limit the damage. That outcome tells you something important about the gap between knowing a threat exists and having the capability to defeat it. Let us look at the broader strategic context, because the timing of this operation and the choice of this particular weapon system reflect a specific American strategic calculation that goes beyond simply clearing the strait. Iran's theory of the conflict, at least as it applies to the strait, was based on the assumption that threatening global energy supplies would generate sufficient economic and political pressure to force the United States to negotiate an end to Operation Epic Fury on terms favorable to Tehran. The logic was coherent. 27% of global seaborne energy transits the Strait of Hormuz annually. Disrupting that flow pushes oil prices above $100 per barrel. Rising energy costs feed into inflation, hurt consumers, damage economic growth, and create political problems for the American administration at home. If Iran could sustain the closure long enough and make the economic pain severe enough, Washington might conclude that the costs of continuing the operation exceeded the benefits and seek an exit. From Tehran's perspective, the strait was a lever of coercive pressure, not merely a defensive measure. The American response to that strategic logic was to attack the instrument of coercion directly, rather than trying to manage the threat by intercepting individual missile launches, which is expensive and operationally demanding, or by patrolling the strait with surface vessels that become targets themselves. The United States moved to physically destroy the missile infrastructure that made the coercion possible in the first place. If the tunnel systems housing Iran's anti-ship missile launches along the coastline have been collapsed and sealed, the coercive leverage disappears, regardless of what Iran's leadership decides to do next. You cannot threaten shipping with missile systems that are buried under tons of collapsed concrete. Subscribe to Frum Report and turn on notifications, because the next phase of this story is going to develop quickly, and you need to be positioned to understand it as it unfolds. There is one dimension of the Hormuz situation that deserves specific attention, because it has significant implications for how this conflict develops from here. The question of international support for restoring freedom of navigation in the strait has been complicated by the ongoing conflict. Trump publicly criticized NATO allies for not providing direct military assistance in the strait operations, while simultaneously insisting that American forces did not need outside help. 7 American allies reportedly indicated willingness to join a coalition patrolling force as of the 3rd week of March. But no concrete commitments materialized, and no formal coalition structure was established. NATO's Secretary-General indicated that alliance members were actively working to find a solution to the Strait crisis. But working to find a solution and actually deploying naval assets into a contested waterway where American operations are ongoing are very different levels of commitment. Most NATO members have been extremely cautious about any action that could be interpreted as direct participation in the broader conflict against Iran. This dynamic creates an interesting strategic situation. The United States has the capability to suppress Iranian missile threats along the strait through air power, as the GBU-72 strikes demonstrate. But maintaining open navigation over the long term requires either a sustained American air presence over the strait, which is resource-intensive and politically complicated, or the restoration of commercial confidence that the waterway is safe enough for normal transit, which requires more than a single round of bunker-busting strikes. Iran retains other means of harassment beyond its hardened missile sites: fast attack boats, drone swarms, mining operations. These capabilities were not addressed by the GBU-72 strikes and could still be used to harass commercial traffic, even with the primary missile battery network degraded. Here is what the available evidence tells us about where things stand and where they are likely to go. The deployment of GBU-72 munitions against hardened Iranian missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz represents a significant escalation in the technical sophistication of American strike operations in this conflict. It demonstrates that the United States is willing to deploy previously unused capabilities when the operational situation demands it, and is not artificially constraining itself to familiar weapon systems. It signals that American planners have been preparing for precisely this kind of campaign against hardened Iranian infrastructure for years and are now executing those plans. For Iran, the strikes create a genuine operational problem. Rebuilding hardened underground tunnel systems takes time, resources, and specialized construction capabilities that are difficult to deploy quickly under active conflict conditions. The anti-ship missile threat along the Hormuz coastline has been meaningfully degraded, though not necessarily eliminated entirely. For global energy markets, the strikes represent at least a partial restoration of the conditions necessary for commercial transit to resume. Whether shipping companies and their insurers will quickly judge the strait safe enough for normal operations is a separate question that depends on a broader assessment of the conflict trajectory, not just the status of a single category of Iranian weapon system. And for the broader conflict, the willingness to deploy the GBU-72 at Hormuz raises an obvious question about where else in Iran's hardened infrastructure this weapon might be applied. American planners have made clear they will use whatever tools are required to achieve their operational objectives. The bunkers have not stopped them yet. We will continue following this story as new information becomes available. Subscribe to Frum Analysis and hit the bell icon, and leave your analysis in the comments below. What do you think the Iranian response to these strikes will be? And does the opening of the strait change the overall conflict calculus in any meaningful way? We read everything. See you in the next one.